one of the researchers here to do a brief introduction of the report. So I'll hand it over to you, Kendra, if that's okay.
Hi Jim, thanks for the introduction. Hello everyone joining us for this live stream. We are in Greenock in the wonderful sunny region of Inverclyde. I'm part of a research team. I'm a senior lecturer at the Department of Work, Employment and Organization. What are we going to do today? We are presenting our report. It's here, and handing it over to Jim. It's a report, it's an outcome from a major research study based in the Strathclyde Business School at the University of Strathclyde. It's based on a project that's called Amplifying Employee Voice and Hearing the Unheard. And it's thankfully funded by the UK's Economic and Social Research Council under its Transforming Working Lives programme. What's the underlying premise for the study? The study was focusing on this idea that access to good work can reduce inequality and poverty, improve working lives, and effective workers' voice is central to this good work and is creating a fairer society, no less than that. What's the importance of the centre of the Inverclyde Advice and Employment Rights Centre in this study? Well, if you join a region like Inverclyde, it's often framed as a region that's deindustrialized, that bears a lot of scars of the past that are still visible in the present. And what we often hear, we are in the region for 2 years, is that it's a community that has shown a lot of resilience. And if you wonder what is resilience actually about, it's the community's capacity to withstand, adapt to, and recover from adverse events and crises. So community capacity in forms of resilience is fostering a long-term strength, and it's fostering well-being. And this is important, and this is very often forgotten when we speak about issues about resilience. It's based on local resources and social connections. And our report is making the case on how actually the Inverclyde Advice and Employment Rights Centre as a unique institution is one of these resources that builds capacity and fosters social connections. And I'm delighted that we have two other researchers here today. It's Dr. Eleanor Kirk from the University of Glasgow, a social legal researcher, and Professor Emeritus Phil Taylor. And Phil, I will just hand over to you to talk us through the report. Over to you.
Okay, this is it here. This is the report. This is the outcome of our study, the research team based at the University of Strathclyde. And the report, or rather our project, goes under the heading Amplifying Employee Voice and Hearing the Unheard. And I'd like you to hold on to that idea of hearing the unheard, because it is extremely important. The project that we're doing has a number of key questions, but perhaps the central question is to what extent and how workers in different sectors and types of job are able to influence the decisions at work that most affect them, that influence, that matter most to them. So we're examining in the Inverclyde area all manner of sectors and areas of employment: the care sector, retail, local authority, manufacturing, hospitality, and call centres. And here's the thought that I mentioned before: hearing the unheard. So if you look at Inverclyde as a whole, that means we had to, as a part of our study, include the Inverclyde Advice and Employment Rights Centre, because it is the focal point of providing employees with information, advice, advocacy, and even representation when they have experienced or are experiencing, or perhaps anticipate that they will experience problems at their work or during their employment. So the centre draws on, and I'm sure Jim will elaborate on this, both the deep knowledge of employment law, the expertise, his own expertise, and the expertise of the centre, and familiarity with the local labour market. So this report comes from 18 months of intense, detailed survey of the work of the IAERC. So I just want to throw out here some key headline findings, if you like. We analysed the data of the centre for the last 10 years, that's 2014 to 2023, and found really quite an astonishing number of employees in Inverclyde who had presented to the centre. 6,209 unique cases. These are not repeat cases, these are unique cases. So, the next question, what kind of troubles or issues or problems did employees present with? And they were seeking information, advice and advocacy representation on pay and wages, unpaid wages or withheld wages, unfair dismissal, the number of people who had experienced arbitrary exit without due cause from their employment, disability discrimination, and then a slew of cases on working time, changes in shifts with lack of notice, people being compelled to work additional hours, then harsh performance management leading to punitive appraisals, and again with disciplinary action that followed from them. Whole number of issues over sickness, absence and pay, and then just a whole number of cases on arbitrary discipline. So, to sum up, the report reveals a mass of breaches of employment rights, the disregard of legislation, a failure by many employers to abide with the ACAS codes of practice. So who or where do the aggrieved employees come from? And it's interesting, if we just take the last year of the evidence that we gathered, 1 in 8 of those presenting at the centre came from the social care sector, came from the care sector more generally, but also large numbers from retail, from facilities management, from call centres, from transporting, from warehousing. But you can say right across the labour market, there's no particular area of employment that's exempt from the incidence of these problems, and across all age groups too, and gender, equally distributed across the case. But if you look at young workers, they face particular problems of vulnerability and insecurity because of their inexperience, perhaps a lack of knowledge of their rights. Older workers, to take another cohort, are more likely to face discriminations, perhaps disability discrimination. So all of the above, this huge incidence of cases affecting all sections of the labour market have taken place within the context, I would say, of increased mental ill health amongst so many workers that's occupationally related, that is exacerbated by, if you like, the insecurity and vulnerability that individuals face. Now, Jim can talk more directly, and will do in a minute, on the work of the centre. I just want to finish, though, with two, I think, pretty important points. The IARC, as has been mentioned, plays a hugely significant role in the community, in addressing the profound deficits in employment rights. These breaches are unacceptable. The second point is pretty crucial, and that is that the IAERC is a unique, deeply rooted organisation that provides both generalised advice and information, but also bespoke, specialised information, advice and advocacy. As such, it should serve as a model that needs to be replicated right across the country, in every city and every major town in Scotland, and probably the UK as well. And these centres need to be properly resourced.
That's great, thanks Phil. That was really important to hear from you, these big insights, big takeaways from the report. I just want to hand over now to Eleanor. Eleanor, you did a study as part of your PhD research, that's a while ago, and you're an absolute expert in social legal issues by now. Maybe you talk us through your experiences with engaging with the region, with the centre 10 years ago, and your outcomes, findings.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kendra, and thank you for involving me in this important event and for allowing me access to this important centre, which was a great education to me also. So I'm really glad to be here to add my voice to these of the Strathclyde team and of the centre itself, to celebrate the distinctive model of support, advice, advocacy and organising that it provides. And it's particularly crucial, as been brought out by Phil and by Kendra already, to a region like Inverclyde, but it is also vitally needed across the UK to help workers assert their rights, to deter ill treatment by employers, and prevent breakdowns of employment relations and the resultant job losses that result from them. So I really welcome this report from the researchers at Strathclyde and the documentation of the important work that the centre does in this distinctive local economic, social and political context. So yeah, specifically 10 years ago, during my doctoral research at the University of Strathclyde, I studied the work of the centre, who act as these kind of rare witnesses of organisational abuses. They're too often hidden from view or silenced. Silenced at work in a sort of micro way and silenced more at a more macro level in the political sphere. So what I learned from the centre and the accounts of the workers who came to it left a lasting impression upon me. It educated me on the many hidden realities of employment relations that trouble regions like Inverclyde especially, but are relevant across the length and breadth of the country. My own subsequent research and the Strathclyde report being launched today reinforce what the centre and its clients revealed to me a decade ago. So let me run through a few of these insights. Firstly, how the complex, multifactorial and accumulative nature of problems at work are heightened and shaped by the lack of options in terms of alternative employment, let alone opportunities for good work or fair work. It was brought into my attention how commonplace it is for such problems to go unaddressed, unresolved, or only partially resolved. Sometimes because the situations that arise are, as Jim put it a while back, unfair but not illegal. The enormous mental and physical toll that these kind of unresolved or partially resolved grievances take on people is really important to know about. And this toll is perhaps only matched by the stress of actually pursuing claims in the employment tribunal system. So as one eminent scholar of industrial relations noted, even successful claims that go there are a lost remedy that rarely prevents job losses and provides only limited redresses for problems at work. The centre also impressed upon me the limits of employment law generally and the way the system operates. Those who have suffered abuses have to go through this complaining, staying the course on a difficult path or obstacle race as it's sometimes referred to access justice. And despite the best efforts of the tribunal service itself, this path has become steadily more legalistic, more formal, and this is partly signalled by the increase in legal representation we see, particularly on the employer side. We have evidence that workers often give up well-founded claims because of the real and expected difficulties that they will face in pursuing justice. And within this context, this is why the centre is vital to communities like Inverclyde, where some employers exploit their power advantage over workers with few other options. So workers really need support to engage with rights enforcement, to enable meaningful voice, to help them retain jobs, or seek compensation where attempts to retain those jobs fail. IARC's model is really highly distinctive, blending, as Phil's mentioned, this expert legal knowledge of the locality and the lowdown of how employers operate in particular labour markets and labour contexts, and also in making use of rights to accompany workers in the workplace, in workplace procedures, seeking to resolve issues and prevent the breakdown of employment relationships before we get to that lost remedy stage that's harder to resolve and often is mentioned in policy discourses as problematic when we really want to be resolving things at workplace level. So I echo the Strathclyde's team recommendations that this model, that the IARC Centre is at the heart of this sort of centre's model, should be replicated across local authorities, and this would make a significant improvement to achieving fairer work, deterring breaches of employment rights by employers, growing workers' confidence to assert their voices and to let them contribute to the achievement of the Scottish and UK government's stated aspirations in this sphere for fair work, for good work, for decent work. Shall I add on a couple of questions? I wondered.
That would be amazing, and I really thank you for that. I think it's really interesting to hear from you that things have changed and then they haven't. So I think if you have a question to Jim, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, just to draw on the great knowledge of Jim and institutionally in the centre, particularly as they're sort of rare witnesses of these organisational abuses, hearing the hidden voices and articulating those. I thought it'd be good to open up a couple of questions that I would like to know from Jim and from the research team as well. So, in my own research, I saw the enormous impact the centre has on clients, the local community and economy, which can also be hard to capture fully, partly because what you do is also a deterrent to bad employers or bad practices. But I wonder if it's possible, firstly, to paint a picture of Inverclyde, how Inverclyde would have been without the intervention of the centre over the last 25 odd years.
Well, as you say, it's hard to determine that because it's difficult to measure deterrence, but I think that's definitely a factor. We came here, 30 years ago. The guys had already started it up. It was started up by a group of trade unionists in the Trades Council who had a long history in ship building, sugar production, etc., etc. So we moved along. Some of the evidence we can gather from speaking to employers is that we had an employer for a multinational saying that they would never roll anything out in Inverclyde first because there would be a chance there would be resistance, organised resistance in terms of grievance procedures being accessed, etc., etc. But I mean that's just sort of anecdotal stuff. So it's difficult to but I think it's fair to assume that Inverclyde is better placed, I think, in this context, although it's not perfect. I think it's probably better placed than most regions simply because of the existence of the centre. The people, Eddie MacDonald, who runs the project, and my colleague Nicola Provan, and a lot of volunteers live in this community. So they're also imparting that type of expertise and knowledge on a daily basis, extended family members, etc., etc. So even just a micro level like that, there are benefits. I have to say it is difficult to quantify without saying that you would say that anyway. But I mean, I think that there are a lot of things we can do better. But I think that we're aware of the resource issues. We recently managed to obtain funding from the National Lottery Scotland for a worker who we think who will be employed to provide dedicated support to those who suffer from mental health issues. That is a real problem for the centre. We can't provide the level of support needed. No medical support, just the emotional support to take them through such difficult situations they're facing in the workplace.
Perhaps I could add one thing to that, which I think is amazing, and it's in the report. But if you consider the latest statistics for the numbers employed in the Inverclyde area are around 31,000. That's the size of the employed workforce here. And going back to that headline statistic, if 6,209 workers in Inverclyde, employees in Inverclyde, have it come to the centre at some point. Now, of course, there'll be movement, exit in and out of the area. There'll be people who've passed away. There'll be people who've exited the labour market and so on. But if you take this as a broad, rule of thumb, you've got a very significant number of the labour force in Inverclyde who have accessed and become clients of this centre. It's really of quite an incredible scale. And you raise a very good question there, Eleanor. Just imagine if the centre had not existed. Where would those 6,209 people have gone to seek advice, information? They'd been left to their own devices and would have faced all of the obstacles that you refer to in attempting to seek remedy for their situation.
May I just add to that? I mean, we've been in the region for 2 years now. We've done close to 150 or even more interviews in different sectors. And the reaction to the question about the tight-knit community is always everybody's nodding and saying, yes, it's important. So we figured out it's a big resource. But I think maybe if you could elaborate a bit what makes the difference, because a resource in your private network, you know, your friends and family, that's one thing. But what makes employment rights so unique that some of the stuff might not be solvable within your circle of friends only, or just going to a website? Why is it so important to have you as a specialist here? What's making the employment relation and employment rights so important?
Well, I think in terms of structural issues, you've got 75% of the population are no members of trade unions. Of course, the ultimate way to access your employment rights is to be a member of a trade union, but we have to realise that that's not going to happen, you know, anytime soon. It's been a downward spiral, hopefully, with the Employment Rights Bill coming, and we'll see an emergence of trade unionism. But we have to live in the realities. Being able to go somewhere for advice is important, but also the staff and volunteers here contextualise the advice, because we know what advice to give in a workplace that you wouldn't give in another workplace, so that, you know, we understand how it works, what the end result's going to be. So you're tailoring advice to people based on the experiences of all of us in the centre, which I think is important in terms of, you know, if you're just giving, you know, hardline advice to people, the key ethos of the project is to retain people in employment. So we try and get in the upstream and early interventions, particularly where there's mental health issues, damaging sex discrimination, maternity stuff, which they're the drivers, we think, that make people leave quicker. If we can get access to those workers at an early stage, then we can work with them to make sure they're retained in the workplace. Of course, by the time somebody comes after dismissed, that's a different a different type of advice, where you're ensuring appeals, you know, and maybe moving on to legal stuff. But the ethos of the project is to ensure that people have got the benefit of upstream intervention or early doors, and that job retention is, for a lot of reasons, very important, but it reduces inequalities and resultant poverty. We've got, you know, episodes of workers reporting with benefit sanctions, you know, as a result of malicious complaints made against them, and there's a whole new world emerging in the care sector with the SSSC registration, where that is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Yep.
So could we say, in a world that's complex enough, when we come to work and employment relations, it gets even more difficult to follow up everything that's going on. We live in a post-COVID, in a cost of living world. So maybe, Eleanor, do you want to elaborate on anything?
Just to echo and add more praise to the centre, I suppose I'm thinking of the testimonials I heard personally from workers 10 years ago about the difference the advice, support, representation had made to their lives, the severity of the problems they were dealing with, the complexity of them, and it was night and day, you know, their experience before they came to the centre and the sort of stress that Jim and colleagues were able to take off those people. So I think that's important to stress, and fitting the bill of the framing of your research project and the particular ESRC funding about transforming working lives. You know, the centre is truly and very powerfully transforming working lives. So I know as well this project's currently documenting more testimonials and lots of data, so I'll hand over to Phil to say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right, and I think this what the centre does is, I mean, we talk about the project being about employee voice. Actually, the centre gives workers voices where they otherwise would not have had them. I mean, that is such a fundamental thing, where workers who face injustice at work might have been silent, might have not been able to have proceeded with any attempt to remedy their injustices. The centre provides that absolutely crucial function. I think the other thing I've got is just a question I want to say to Jim, because this came out in the research that I was doing, and that is how it ties absolutely into the word bespoke kept coming into my head as I was going through this. You provide us advice and information and support that's specifically tailored to the needs of individuals as they present from whatever different background, a different problem they've had. That seems to be really quite unique, and that is so different from just like standardised, go and check a website, to be beyond comparison. But the question, one thing that emerged from the interaction with you was the fact that you said that cases are becoming more complex, have become more complex, and in fact you're having to devote much more time and resource to particular cases than you did previously. Is that
yeah,
that's
but
true?
that certainly seems to be the what's happening. I mean, I don't know if that's because we've got more experience, we're moving into deeper into cases, but as I mentioned earlier, in the care sector, that's presenting, you know, there are registration problems there as well, some anecdotal evidence of weaponisation of the SSC and employment rights. And, you know, I met at a low level with politicians about this. I haven't done, as usual, I've not the time to push it forward. But we need to look at representation at the SSC. If you're not in a trade union, you don't get legal aid for it. So these are minimum wage workers who are having to navigate their way through a system. When they come and get advice for us for the care sector, they don't understand that even the allegation that's made against them is on the SSC website. So therefore, there's nothing until the case is sorted that gets that taken down. I lie to the fact that if, for instance, if there's somebody maybe across the water or in another region, when you're preparing for a SSC hearing, their lawyers send you case law. So that could be a lay person, a minimum wage worker, with no, and the upshot of that is they're simply just going to close the envelope and go and get a job in retail. But the realisation with care workers in particular of what they're looking at when they realise that registration entails so much before there's even a disciplinary hearing. And often we don't tell them that on the first interview because it would be too much for them to take. So that's a real sector that is growing up and occurs in the for-profit sector. We don't see that much in the local authorities at all. But in the for-profit sector locally, and I know the colleagues in other areas, trade unionists, that's a real issue that needs to be addressed moving forward.
That's great. I think before we maybe then come to closer to the end, one thing that strikes me is all the three of you in your respective positions have engaged with the new employment rights bill. I was just wondering, any comments on that? What are you thinking about that moving forward?
I think most importantly, to Jim first. Yeah.
Well, it's early days yet. I think that we're just watching the interest. I know we were part of the contribution made to the study, to the bill during the consultation period through the uni's response file. On the ground and on the face, it seems okay. It's supposed to come, I think, October 26 is the rollout. So by that time, it will be the Employment Rights Act, I think they'll call it. Of course, if you can get day one rights without any strings attached, and various other issues, fire and rehire and stuff like that. But, you know, it remains to be seen. There are some signs that there's going to be a change of tack to it. But I think, and I hope Phil can maybe talk on this a bit further, I think the key thing here is going to be the Fair Work Agency, the regulatory body that is going to come in, because it's quite obvious we need a labour relations body that we can report the worst abuses to. That doesn't exist at present.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. The Employment Rights Bill, however you look at it, is the most significant piece of potential legislation that Britain has seen for a generation, if not more. Some of the promises that have been made around the bill, and my reading of the bill itself, indicate that, for example, if workers are accessing rights on day one of their employment, that is a huge step forward. The ending of it, what's called exploitative zero-hour contracts, probably the bill doesn't go far enough in that respect. There are also provisions for increasing the access of trade unions to non-union workplaces. And I think all of these are to be welcomed. There are some concerns, however, that perhaps the way that the bill is formulated would not prevent, for example, instances such as the P&O fire and rehire that took place in 2022. There are also some concerns that the CBI and the employers are lobbying to dilute the bill, which would be a major issue. But I agree completely with Jim that the question of regulation and implementation that a Fair Work agency will bring is a crucial question. Now, that Fair Work agency has to be properly funded. It has to have enforcement rights. It has to have the ability to go into workplaces and deal with breaches of employment law when they take place. It has to be accessible to individuals as well, so that they feel confident that their concerns are going to be addressed. I don't think in any respect, however, that the Fair Work Agency, which will be a reserved UK power and body when it's set up, it has to stand alongside centres like the IARC. It's not a substitute for the IARC, far from it. We're looking at the wind. There is a wind of change that recognises how employees have been subject to really quite terrible situation over the last decade. You say, look at Sports Division, the Sports Division warehouse that triggered even an investigation, a report by Theresa May, the Conservative Prime Minister. It's recognised that there are whole parts of the country where there are flagrant breaches of employment rights. A Fair Work agency is absolutely crucial, but it has to have the teeth and it has to have to be resourced, and it also has to work alongside centres such as Inverclyde. And again, I repeat, this is something that I think there are 32 local authorities in Scotland. Irrespective of what happens at UK level, each local authority in Scotland should have a centre like Inverclyde Advice Employment Rights Centre.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Jim and Phil have said already. I totally agree with these comments. And so often the devil is in the detail of these big promises, which make us quite optimistic about what might happen in the eventual act. One aspect to add from my research and building on the work of other labour lawyers who document the way in which we have this history of the way in which labour law in this country, employment law, has developed so that we have this expanding array of rights, but at the same time the undermining of our means to enforce them and access them. So in this bill there are quite a lot of provisions which seek to take away the sort of gaps or between the expectation and reality of things like how people understand their employment rights. We know the headlines that there's a right to unfair dismissal, but often not the bit about there being a 2-year qualifying period with the same employer. So with bits like this in the bill that seek to reduce those, take away those caveats, I'm also hopeful that this might lead to greater sort of congruence between the law and the books and how people can actually enact it, making it more simple, making it less prone to leading to people relying on the insurance of the law that's not really there to protect them. So I hope that will make the law more enforceable, more congruent between what it aims to do and aspires to do and actually what is actually realised in workplaces. Okay, that's all I want to add.
Well, thank you so much. We don't have any comments so far on the YouTube channel. I think from my perspective, that's a wonderful wrap for us. I think building up the means and the capacity in the community for the workforce with a great impact on that said community and the region in general. I think that's a great takeaway. It's something to fight for, to campaign for, and we can't just wait for the law. That's my understanding, because we still have huge pockets of for-profit organizations just simply exploiting workers on a daily basis and to the detriment of the workers' rights. So thanks for hosting us here today. I wanted to thank also Nicola and Eddie being in the room today, supporting us. As ever, it's been wonderful to come out here. Thanks, Eleanor, for making space today. And Phil, of course, on behalf of the research project, I think we are forever grateful also to all the workers who came in, who gave further testimony, in addition to all the kind of really demanding daily routines they have to follow and they have to go through, and the challenges they face in their working lives. And massive thanks, Jim, for leading this center for so long. We hope that the capacity building also means that the funding is more robust for the next years, and we see enough volunteers coming through the doors. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kendra.